types of cameras, and he also has a website that can tell you what's going on in the Bay Area for photographic opportunities, which I highly recommend. So with that, we've got a long bio description of Doug on our website. I won't read that to you, but I'll turn it over to Doug. Welcome, Doug.
Well, it's nice to be here. That website you mentioned is easy to remember. It's bayareaphotoscene.com, all one word. And if you folks have any exhibits or other events that are open to the public and you'd like them publicized, just drop me a line and I'd be happy to add it to that website.
Right.
Glad to be here tonight. Lots of good photographs to talk about.
Okay, and we'll start with creative, basic, 2 images. And I'm hoping that everyone sees what I see. Creative, basic, 2 images.
I can see it.
That's pretty cool. When fabulous is a color.
Yeah, the colors certainly are fabulous. Here the photographer has transformed a photo of a flamboyance of flamingos. I looked it up. Flamboyance is the collective noun for flamingos, and I certainly think it actually accurately describes them. So that flamboyance of flamingos has been transformed into an abstract swirl of colors while somehow maintaining the essence of flamingo. There's a lot to enjoy as the eye kind of flows along with the stream. So the texture of this kind of allows the eye or encourages the eye to follow along. It's quite enjoyable. I do find the dark area in the lower left kind of throws the image a little bit off of balance. And this is creative, so you can do anything you want. And you might consider thinking about maybe cloning some flamingo into that darker area and see what you think of that. Next, please.
Tiger lily in violet and green.
Yeah, here the photographer's taken quite an excellent shot of a flower and transformed it into this glowing fluorescent mystery. I particularly enjoy how the stamens are really glowing and coming out. The background is sufficiently out of focus to provide a non-distracting abstract pattern while maintaining that botanical theme. Now, an alternate composition might be to crop in significantly from the right to bring a lot of focus onto the flower itself. You might give this a try if you haven't done so already. However, I actually find that blurred image of the stem and the leaves on that right to be quite an attractive secondary interest in the photo. Okay, thank you.
Creative intermediate, 3 images. Time for chicks.
Yeah, this image sort of gives me the feeling of chicks exploding out of a sun-hot egg. I usually think of chicks as soft and cuddly and a sign of spring, but that's not really the emotion I get from this photo. The chicks do not look too comfortable or happy, and there are some tinges of red, which immediately brings to my mind some of the classic paintings of kitchen scenes with a vanitas theme, containing pictures of slaughtered birds or carcasses in various stages of decay. So I'm not exactly sure what the photographer's intent was with this photograph. And so it's hard for me to provide any constructive criticisms without a better understanding of that intent. Next, please.
Spring is in the air.
Yeah, it's a nice use of pastel color and textures to give this imagery this painterly springtime feel. It's kind of very abstract and just talking about the emotion of spring instead of any kind of literal presentation. I particularly like the one watering can that seems to be being held out by an invisible hand, and having the flowers sprinkling out of that and then flowing across the scene. I do note that the flowers are semi-transparent, which is kind of interesting. It gives kind of the whole scene a little bit of touch of magical surrealism. Okay, thank you.
Focus point.
Yeah, a very dramatic perspective, transforming a building into this wedge that's piercing the sky. The brilliant vertical lines on the right side of the building are really, for me, an attractive abstraction. Some of the edges of the building are also outlined by the thin white lines, and I think those are particularly effective, and you may want to consider enhancing them and perhaps even adding them to the edges of the building that don't have them naturally. Now, there are no deep blacks in this image, and perhaps that is part of the point the photographer is trying to make. However, because there's no deep blacks, particularly because there's no deep blacks, I'm a little bit concerned that that screen effect that's covering the whole image is contributing to a little bit of a muddy appearance. And I'm wondering if you could maybe consider confining that screen to just the left side of the building, where I think it will contribute more to the abstract nature of that side of the building, while not giving the whole image this slightly muddy appearance. Okay, next.
Advanced 5 images. Wide, wonderful city.
Yeah, I love how you've exploited this kind of exaggerated perspective plus high contrast plus these highly saturated color to reinterpret this part of the city of San Francisco. The fact that you've included wide in the title is a nice play on words, considering this was probably taken with a wide angle lens as well. I have just one small nit. You have this beautiful flow of the eye wanting to like zoom up to the sky, following the trends of the building. And you probably want to like eliminate any slight possibility of interrupting that flow. So I think you should consider trying to remove those power lines that are coming diagonally across the frame. I know they're the original natural part of the scene and sort of contribute to some of what San Francisco is, but I think even using the heel tool, just dragging along there, if you're a Photoshop user, you could probably eliminate that. And that would just remove this one slight interruption to that upright sweep of the image. Next, please.
Ukraine, breaking apart, reaches out for help.
Yeah, certainly this is a very topical subject and very full of emotion. Using the national colors of Ukraine and the national flower as a starting point is particularly effective. I like how you varied the different sizes and orientations of the triangles, which are your symbol of the country breaking apart. I think some areas are more effective than others at giving the impression of the flower breaking. I particularly draw your attention to towards the top, maybe the second petal in. To me, that really looks like a petal breaking apart in a way some of the other areas, particularly down near the middle, don't quite have as effective a look. So you might want to study exactly what the characteristics of that area are in order to make sure you use similar techniques everywhere in the picture. I think it has something to do with the fact that like this gradient of broken areas that get more dense as you approach the edge of the flower. there appears to be this jet of broken material that's kind of flying up towards the upper right-hand corner while you have a relatively low density near the bottom. You certainly don't need to have a uniform distribution of this broken material, but because that jet is so positioned up near the top, I think it kind of unbalances the images a little bit. So you might want to think about lowering that jet and maybe giving a little bit more radial symmetry to the broken pieces while certainly maintaining randomness. Next, please.
Loose lip.
Yeah, I think this is a good example of where the title is important to helping the viewer get the message. So the two work together quite well here. I also appreciate the fact that you've allowed some leaves or narrow branches to obscure the image of the flower petal of the quote lips. I think that gives it a little bit more natural feel. And it prevents the image from being too literal. I also enjoy the styling you've approached it, the kind of subtle softness that you've given this image, which is quite important and quite enjoyable in the areas outside that main subject area itself. Okay, next, please.
Another great day, but
this is a wonderfully absurdist image, almost hyper-realism being employed. You have a very good handling of the shadows in this composite, consistent lighting throughout through the image, and a nice shadow being created by the fisherman naturally falling on the rock. So excellent job of compositing here. There may be a couple of spots on the rocks that are light that I expected to be dark, but overall, really a very nice job here. And of course, we see that bird looking down at the fisherman. And so a lot is being communicated just by the but ... in the title. Thanks.
warped.
Yeah, very good use of color, of glow, of symmetry. And it's really quite powerful and enjoyable in this thing. Now, I feel like the title Warped feels like more of a description of the method used to create the image, rather than saying anything about the emotion you are trying to elicit. I don't get kind of the emotional feeling of warped out of this picture, although I can certainly, it makes me think that you have warped some image. And so I think in this abstract category, you might want to choose a title that is more closely related to leading your viewer into the emotion that this might be eliciting, such as grasping or encompassing. Thank you.
Creative Masters, 7 images. Year of the Dragon.
Yeah, at one club I judged, the judge's evaluation sheet included the comment that the judge obviously didn't know what he was looking at. And although I did not understand what they were talking about in that case, I have to confess that is probably true for this image. I'm really not understanding it. And I spent some time looking at it and I never really grasped it. So I apologize. I really can't give any cogent comments on this image. Sorry about that. Next, please.
Yang Yin.
Yeah, not only do I see multiple faces here, but I see faces within faces. I like the title. I like the way you've turned yang into a verb. And then I'm wondering, is this yin that is being yang? What exactly does that all mean? And so it makes me spend quite a bit of time with the photo, looking at it, enjoying it, trying to understand what might be really meant by this. One thing that I did notice is that the left side of the image is composed of, well, yeah, the left side of the image is composed of some rather large white or dark or light and dark areas, while the right side, the area, dark and light areas, are much smaller in size. And I do wonder if the image would work stronger if that were more balanced between the two sides. And it's a little bit accentuated by the fact that on the right side, there are like three pretty readily identifiable faces that are kind of lined up in parallel, while elsewhere they're kind of randomly oriented. I'm not sure exactly what could be done about this, but I just wonder if there's some way that this could be broken up and if that might make this image even more powerful. Okay, thank you.
The milky strawberry.
Yeah, I think, you've used a strobe or some kind of high speed here to capture a critical moment. And what's particularly interesting about this image, at least for me, is that both the splash captured there and the strawberry itself is fully visible. We often see some compositions where the fruit has disappeared into water and you can see the splash, but this image where we see everything together, I think is quite nice. And particularly since you have this like bright red strawberry in a field of white. You have a diagonal composition here where the strawberry and most of the splash is lined up along a diagonal that goes from the lower left to the upper right. I think that's quite strong. What I found particularly intriguing is these little white splashes coming out from the fruit itself. Looks like maybe milk gets stuck onto the seeds that are on the outside of the strawberry and are now leaving. That gives a nice effect. Also, by the fact that the seeds are on the outside of this fruit means that this fruit is actually an achene and not a berry, in spite of its name. And in that vein, if you find that intriguing, you should ask me sometime about whether the tomato is a vegetable or a fruit, and I can tell you the story about that. Next.
A swirling dress.
Yeah, for me, the pucker in the middle gives the impression of cloth, which helps to support what you're telling me in the title. And that little tuck in at the bottom left is almost implies to me a hand grabbing the skirt and holding it up. So I think that also is a nice part of this image. You have the swirls have these jagged lines in them, and that really does give the impression of motion and makes you feel like this whole thing is swirling around. Okay, thanks.
Cool pastels.
Yeah, it's interesting to me how a few strokes can recall the facial features of people when overall this image is composed of rather large blocks of pastel. You are pretty brave using pastel in male figures, but I think it works very well in this case, given that the expressions on most of these figures are so friendly and like they're in gentle conversation with each other. Okay, thanks.
Fly away.
Now, one could interpret the white rectangles as literally sheets of paper being blown in the wind. But because they are so abstracted, they could stand for anything, even an emotional state. The viewer must contribute to the meaning of this image. The center of rotation is far above and just to the inside of the right border. And I think that placing the center of rotation there is quite effective. I love the golden brown background, and together with that golden brown and the white sheets, this tends to lead, for at least for me, to a very joyous interpretation of this image. Thank you.
San Francisco radiates in the sunshine.
This is a lovely pop art interpretation of San Francisco and quite appropriate for the city of flower power. We see the tracks of the cable cars, we see Chinatown, we see the Bay Bridge, makes us so archetypically San Francisco. It would be really neat if there was an actually recognizable cable car in the picture. I really can't, I see some cars, but I really can't pick out a cable car itself. And I think that would be kind of cool if that was there. But the brilliant supersaturated colors really give kind of a very lively interpretation of the city. Thank you.
Journalism. Basic 2 images. Sequence, run or die. I'll go through the sequence first.
Thank you.
3 untimed 5K fun runs with 31 events across the country. A run for the fashionista to couch potato, just for fun. The race organizers toss color at runners. The most colorful 5K on the planet.
Well, this is certainly a very newsworthy subject and certainly appropriate for the journalism category. I think the first slide is a good introduction to the sequence. It's literally the start of the race, and we have start in words all over the beginning. So it's the start of the race and the start of the sequence, and gives a good overview of the crowd and people lining up to begin the race. Go to the next slide, please. The second image kind of brings home the concept of this race with the colors of the outfits, the colors having been thrown at the people, 2 cute young girls there, enough of the background crowd to maintain that feeling, and generally an overview of joyousness and happy and color. So bringing, as I said, bringing home the whole concept of this race. Going on to the third. This brings some more personal nature to the race and to the event. But you know, we kind of saw that in the previous image as well with the 2 little girls. So I'm not sure that this adds a lot to the sequence. I'm not sure an editor would feel that it was worth the space on the page to have 3 images rather than just the first 2. And the editor would probably want to know something more about these people, like at least their names. It would be also good somewhere in one of these titles if you included the location and date of the events. Thank you.
Community members sit shoulder to shoulder at this iconic American diner, Vinny's Luncheonette in Port Chester, New York.
Yeah, this fits in kind of the human interest section of journalism, and I think it works well from that perspective. It's kind of a documentary shot about this particular place. It kind of reminds me of the Norman Rockwell painting. The use of black and white, I think, is effective and was a good choice. The composition is a little bit challenging. I know that it was difficult for the photographer in this situation to really get what they want. But the fact that there's this gap between the police officer and the next person to to the left, and the person on the right being so close to the edge of the frame. I can see how you'd want to include more people, and particularly the person behind the counter in this image, and why you selected this particular cropping. You could consider cropping tighter into the police officer, cropping in from the left. I'm not sure that adds that much to it. I don't know if you could have taken advantage of the gap between the two people, the empty seat there, to get a perspective from the other side and maybe bring these people more towards the center of the frame, and maybe bring in even the third person to the right to contribute to this side-by-side nature that you mentioned in the title. Thanks.
Journalism. This is a 4-image sequence. Rescue. During low tides, people can often be seen clam digging at Bodega Bay. These people were a distance from shore, and one can be seen with a cell phone out. As the couple headed towards shore, a California State Parks Service rescuer waited to help them across the deep channel that was getting increasingly deeper with the incoming tide. The woman was assisted first. The rescuer paddled her across the deeper water. The man stayed behind, waiting to be assisted after the woman was safely on land. Once safely to shore, the woman was assisted out of the water and across the slippery wet rocks by another rescuer.
Yeah, very good use of sequence. In journalism, usually the photographer arrives a little bit after the main action has been initiated and needs to capture what has happened and tell the story that way. But here you were lucky enough to capture the setup to the whole event, so we understand why the people were out there in the first place. So that's pretty good, and it's set up the stage for this step-by-step process through all the critical phases, right up to the end where the person's being helped to the shore. So we do see all the critical stages of this event and can really understand what's happening and appreciating the significance of the situation that these people were in, what the cause was, and the fortunate fact that there was a lifeguard there to help them out. It would be useful to include a date in the title in journalism. Okay, thank you.
Goat Bar, one of two. An ancient tug of war played on horseback with a recently killed goat. The competition occurred at the 2013 Altai-Kazakh Eagle Festival in Sagsay, Mongolia. The winner rides away with the goat carcass.
So this image sequence does cover the who, what, when, where, and why of journalism. So it works very well in that regard. I do like the second picture quite a bit, but I'm not sure that it adds a lot to the journalism story. So in that sense, again, it's good as a sequence, but again, I think it depends on how much space people have when they're publishing these pictures, whether they would just stick with the more powerful first image, which really tells the majority of the story, or whether they would like to include the quite nice and finish of the second story. We don't have sequences in travel, but I think particularly the first one would work well in travel as well as in journalism. Okay, thanks.
Journalism Advanced, 3 images. Flower Piano, 1 of 4 sequence. For this annual event, pianos and musicians were distributed throughout San Francisco Botanical Gardens and music surprises greeted strollers. They heard traditional jazz, classical music played by a young pianist, and came upon an Afro-Cuban fusion combo. This family's quiet moment was enriched by the music of a Chopin.
Well, it was a very interesting use of sequence to show the variety of music that was available at this event. I think the opening shot is very strong. And I think the way the mood of the whole sequence changed when you brought in that last image really made for a nice ending to the whole story. Now, a print editor would probably choose either the first or the last image to publish. But if we were online, it was the online journal, there's a good possibility that all four might be published. It provides sort of a cinematic sequence. And when you're not resource constrained, you might very well want to use all four. It would be helpful if there were a date in the title as well. Next, please.
Kern County, one of three. Aging crude oil pump near McKittrick, California in Kern County. The pump in the McKittrick oil field is no longer in service. Nearby in the Cymric oil field, Chevron operates groups of modern pumps. The Cymric Chevron oil facility pumps oil from the Pleistocene-age porous sandstone. This field is a heavy oil production site and uses modern technology to recover oil.
This is a very important story. I appreciate your sequencing of going from old pump to new pump to production overview. But I think to make this really work, you need to add some historical perspective to the first image, like something like when was oil first discovered in California? Otherwise, the first one is I'm not sure exactly how it contributes to the whole story you're trying to tell. Also, if you do something like that, it's likely to pull in a larger audience and as well. You could add some context, such as where California stands among oil producing states, or how much of California's oil consumption is supplied by in-state resources. I'd also consider making your main title more specific, because when you think about this, that would be like the headline over this story, and then the captions for the individual images would be the part of the title that's after the brackets. So a main title, I don't know what it would be, but it could be something like oil production in Kern County rather than just Kern County. Okay, thanks.
Jail, one of three. As winter begins, Churchill, Manitoba braces for hungry polar bears encroaching on city limits by the aroma of potential food. This is one of the many bear traps awaiting use. Rags dipped in fat are hung inside the traps to attract the offending bears. Pulling on the rag triggers the door to drop. Captured bears are kept in this holding facility, polar bear jail, without food for a week or so, and then taken away and released, taken far away and released. Feeding them led to high recidivism.
Well, I think this is a good use of sequencing to tell the story of these bear traps. The first image is a great introduction. Not only do we have this overview of what a bear trap looks like, but in the background we have the panels that are describing polar bear safety and polar bear facts. So that really produces the feeling of we really kind of getting to understand what's going on. And then as we move to the second image, we're now seeing some more detail about exactly how this trap works and understanding it. And then finally, we move to the third image. And it's an interesting building, how they've used the the shape of the building and painted it to make it look like a sleeping polar bear. I think that's quite interesting. It provides some additional information. This is a polar bear that they actually have to have a polar bear holding facility. And I think it's really interesting, this facts about how they don't feed the bears, which originally thought, oh, that's kind of cruel. But then you realize, as it's explained in the title, that they don't want that the bears to go away thinking, hey guys, free food in jail, and therefore come back. So it's interesting how we need to make the trade-offs, and we see some of those bear traps off to the right too. So that kind of brings some more context and kind of ties all three images together. Okay, thanks.
Masters, level 4 images. Resting spot on a preview day in March 2022 at Carrington Ranch, one of Sonoma County's soon-to-be regional parks off Coleman Valley Road, Bodega, California.
Well, this is certainly a very beautiful photograph and does give a lot of information of the beauty of this area. And it's an excellent use of perspective to give this bench kind of the center of image. And it is a beautiful bench, the way it's worn and has this beautiful texture to it. But this is photojournalism. And so from that perspective, is resting spot really the story here? Or is it, is the story should be the reason this area is slated to be a park? And it's that ought to be highlighted. And is this the photograph that tells that story? Or even if you want to use this photograph, can you somehow include more information about in the title to get us thinking about why this is going to become a regional park? Next.
Lost Coast Surfing, 104. The rocky beaches of the Lost Coast are in protected wilderness and are normally seen by thru hikers. But when the waves are big, surfers arrive. The beach at Big Flat Creek boasts one of the best surfing breaks on the California coast, a point break that delivers a long ride close to the shore. For avid surfers, the big waves and lack of crowds are worth the all-day hike to get there. And after a few days, when the big waves subside, it's time to head for home.
Well, each image in this sequence does contribute to the story of what is unique about this area from the perspective of surfing. It's a nice sequence from arriving to participating to leaving. I think the second photo in this sequence is quite likely the most important from the perspective of journalism. It describes why this particular area is so important to surfers, combining the image with the title. It's unfortunately, this is also the image that has the poorest image quality of all the images in the story. And that does distract from its ability to tell the story. If we go back to the first image, as a photo editor, I would probably crop the first image to include just the group of people to the upper right and eliminate some of that foreground, because I think, as you point out in the title, this will focus on the people who have hiked here just to surf and have set up the tents. It'll still include enough of the area to give us that sense of wilderness, I think, and we'll bring a little bit tighter focus to the image. Okay, thank you.
Wind power. American farmers started to use windmills in the 1800s to raise water for their farms. 100 years later, wind farms had grown exponentially throughout the US and even to the islands of Hawaii. Today, the maintenance of this industry is voracious. Wind techs are in such high demand but they can command $40,000 to $70,000 without a college degree.
I really like the story arc that you provided, from the farm windmills to the modern wind farms to the wind techs. The titles are closely associated with the image, which is always a good thing. I can go back and forth between the title and the image to get more out of the image as I go along. The last image, which is a very highly telephoto image, is particularly dramatic and really gives a sense of scale of what these wind turbines look like. And it's particularly fun to see that one of those workers is giving the victory sign. It kind of adds a little touch of human interest to this journalistic story. Okay, next.
Makeshift Memorial, 104. On the night of October 28th, 2021, Shaylee Dondero, Quinn Murphy, and Lucy Lazarus died in a car crash on the back roads outside of Bishop, California. Classmates of the girls, aged 15, 16, and 19, constructed a makeshift memorial filled with personal memorabilia for their friends. The memorial sits alone amongst the sagebrush of the Owens River Valley, with the Eastern Sierra as a backdrop on one side, and the canal in which the young girls drowned on the other side.
Well, this is certainly a tragic story with a heartwarming response, well told in pictures and titles. Certainly lots of good journalistic information in all of these titles. I think the first and second images basically tell the same story. And although I appreciate the wanting to give the close-ups of different parts of the memorial, I think just one of them would be quite sufficient. I think the fourth image and its title is very powerful, and combined with image number 3 is very compelling and probably sufficient. If you were to use only images 3 and 4, for example, the story could be made stronger by perhaps using a lower perspective on image 3 and cropping in tighter from the left and the right. That would bring more attention to the memorial, which will be needed if you were to eliminate 1 and 2, and would kind of replace what 1 and 2 are stories, are contributing to the stories. And you would still, even with that cropping, you would still provide that context of sagebrush and Sierra. Okay.
Okay, we'll take a break. 9 images. Angel Island, Toyon.
Well, beautiful color and excellent use of light to develop the 3-dimensional character of these berries. There's kind of a diagonal structure to this image, which I think adds a lot of interest and energy to it. So it's kind of going from the lower left to the upper right. Sometimes having the subject disappearing into blurry obscurity can be effective. I don't think it's working particularly well in this case. And part of that is because the out of focus area is so bright and therefore draws our attention. I would suggest you experiment by cropping in from the left to just before the topmost berry, and maybe even a little bit in from the right to cut off the 2 berries that are closest to the right. It'll turn it into a vertical presentation, but it'll bring attention to that central in focus area. There'll still be some areas out of focus, and you may want to consider just darkening those, and even maybe brightening up the center part a little bit, and see what you think about that composition. Okay, thanks.
The mill on the Bryan River.
This is quite a classic winter scene from the Northeast. I'm originally from the Northeast, so it kind of rings a bell, emotional bell with me. The way that the branches are covered by snow and so intertwined kind of suggests the texture that the photographer ended up applying to the whole photograph. And this texture is so subtle that I didn't notice it at first. It simply contributed to the overall emotional impression that this image provides. I am curious about what it would look like if the intensity of the effect were reduced in some areas. I'm particularly thinking of the sky, which is where kind of the texture a little bit jumps out at you. Maybe, I don't know if there's a way to mask that area and reduce the contrast or something like that, and see how that impacts the overall feeling of this image. Thank you.
Wildflowers bidding farewell to the sun.
Well, we have a number of things in our toolbox, and I like to use the word toolbox instead of the word rules. So we have like the quote unquote rule of thirds. Well, I would say that that's just something that's in our compositional toolbox, which we can choose to use if it's appropriate. And here the item in our toolbox is the power of 3. So when oftentimes the composition somehow seems more complete if the number of subjects are 3. And it turns out that this works in rhetoric as well as visual. So, you know, we have things like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, truth, justice in the American way. Somehow 3 resonates. You have a nice handling of the background in this case where you put it out of focus and generated kind of this mottled feeling. It keeps the focus on the flowers without being too boring. So I think that works quite well. The 2 lower flowers are a little bit soft compared to the top flower, but I actually think that that's working in this case. Now notice if it were the other way around and the top flower were out of focus and the bottom 2 were sharp, I don't think it would work at all. Now, it doesn't really feel like sunset to me, which is what the title suggested. So I'm intrigued by what you mean by bidding farewell. Yet it certainly calls attention to a glorious day. Thank you.
Falls at Bernie.
Yeah, waterfalls are definitely intriguing. And one thing that makes this particular waterfall attractive to me is all the moss. I think, we see so many photographs of waterfalls over stone, and having the softness there is quite interesting and quite a different feel. Now, the photographer faced a real challenge taking this picture because some of the water is in shadow while some is in bright light. And undoubtedly, this range of luminance exceeded the dynamic range of the camera. In this case, definitely take the shot, but be prepared to do a lot of editing. Fixing it may require taking multiple exposures at different settings and then being careful as you blend these images together. If you can increase the contrast in the brightest water, you should try doing that, but there may be no detail to find, and certainly don't do anything that turns that water gray. You also might try experimenting, and I admit this may be painful, cropping in from the left to eliminate the overexposed stream on that side, and then cropping a little bit up from the bottom to match. There's kind of this bright out of focus bush at the bottom that you probably want to eliminate anyway. You also should consider burning in the bright brown bush along the right border and the reddish brown bush in the top left. Thank you.
The beauty of interdependence.
Yeah, this is a wonderful macro shot. The eyes are fantastic, and that's all that really matters in this photograph. Your theme is interdependent, so you have included a lot of the flower, and it is bound to be out of focus, unless you do something like focus stacking. But in this case, the out of focus flower forms a beautiful abstract background while maintaining enough structural integrity that there is no question as to what it is. Now, you could centering the subject does seem quite appropriate in this case. Now, you could experiment with cropping in from the right, eliminating some of the areas that are most out of focus and very bright. But when I tried experimenting this with myself, I found that it transforms the picture from communicating a vibe of beauty to communicating one of threat. So you might not want to do that. But you could try darkening the brightest areas in the lower right to keep the focus on the insect. Although I'm not sure that will really make much difference in terms of improving the image. Thank you.
New snow.
I find this to be quite a romantic scene. It might be tempting to make it monochrome, except that the red branches in the foreground really elicit an intense feeling of place in me. Now, I spent a lot of time in the Northeast and upstate New York, so these red twigs really have a lot of personal meaning for me. I'm not sure it makes so much difference to other people, but I think it's an important element of the photograph. And even though we sort of have this dictum of don't block the viewer's entry in the picture by putting things in the foreground that kind of block your entry, I don't think that applies in this case. Now, I think this picture would be an excellent photo if the log were not present, and I wonder what it would look like if it were cloned out. But here it does provide an additional point of interest in the kind of center of the image. I think there is one little thing I think you need to consider, though, and that is because the snow on the top of the log is so bright and its reflection is also so bright, it kind of transforms this log into something that's sticking out of the water into this wedge that's floating above the water. And once you see it that way, it's kind of hard to get it out of your mind. So I think you should try to maybe darken the snow above, particularly if you can pull out some detail out of that snow, that would be helpful. And also make sure that the reflection of the log and its snow in the water is darker than the part that's above the water. I think if you do that, it will prevent this kind of optical illusion from happening. I also noticed that there's kind of this magenta cast that's getting stronger as you approach the left-hand border. I don't feel like that's intentional. I mean, if it is, fine. But if it isn't, I think you should try to remove that color cast in that area. Thank you.
A meadow of thistle.
Well, I think the bee is definitely a highlight of this photo. And only having one flower in focus does set the mood, but still gives the impression of this field of thistle. So I think that's actually working quite quite well and works together with the title to set the goal or the meaning of this image. I'm a little bit concerned with the large flowerless green area on the center right. One could clone in some out of focus thistles, but you might also experiment with a kind of radical crop in from the right. This would have the additional effect of making the central flower in B even more prominent and kind of strengthen this diagonal composition that's already present in the image, where the image kind of flows from the upper left to the lower right. Sometimes the focus blur can cause some strange effects, and this is present in the area right up above, straight up above the B, where there's this kind of green arch with a spike on it, which has some kind of weird bokeh effects on it. I'm not sure what you can do about it. I mean, you could do some very careful retouching, but it might be difficult and might end up making the situation even worse. Okay, thanks.
Mute swans, number 3.
Well, I am quite amazed that you could achieve this perspective and that the swans did this wonderful job of posing for you so nicely. Plus, you had a wonderful sky. The eyes in this image are very sharp, and there's a nice catchlight, kind of brings a lot of life to the birds. And there is detail in all areas of the feathers, except maybe a few points where they are the brightest. And this is pretty difficult to achieve with white birds. So this is overall a good effect. Thanks.
Petaluma's tribute to the Ukraine crisis.
I find this composition very interesting. In some ways, the perspective seems wrong, but in a way that contributes positively to the effect. I kind of wonder if something like a fisheye lens wasn't used to take this photo. The long exposure gives these lovely glowing streaks in the water, which I think contributes a lot and kind of adds some interest to an area that might otherwise be pretty bland. I do think you need to work on the title. I don't think Petaluma is paying tribute to the crisis. So I think, a more appropriate title might be something like Petaluma's tribute to Ukraine in its crisis. Give some thought to that. Thanks.
Pictorial intermediate, 4 images. Car 54.
Well, it's a wonderful archetypical San Francisco scene. I think the sepia tone does give this an old-time feel, which is kind of the nostalgia that the cable cars provide in any event, and this just encourages you to feel that way. The distressed border also contributes to this feeling, but I think that is the passenger with the cane that really makes this picture. You might try lightening him up just a tad, particularly in his face. Just as a reminder to everyone, things like border are considered graphic elements, which are certainly acceptable in N4C pictorial compositions, but only as long as they are created by the photographer and are not stock items. Thanks.
Foxtail pine snag west of Mount Whitney.
Well, I really appreciate the photographer giving me the accurate name for what this pine is, the foxtail pine. It really caused me to do my own research into this species. And I I'm honestly shocked that I did not know about them previous to this. That they're fascinating. And in the image itself, I really like the low perspective where you're shooting up. It definitely gives like power to the tree, and makes it very prominent. And this low perspective is something that typically, whatever your subject is, it makes it seem more powerful. There's nice lighting, which is really modeling the shapes of the stag, so we can really feel all the nooks and crannies. And I enjoy having the background, which gives a lot of context and kind of a beautiful sky. Perhaps you could experiment with darkening the rocks in the foreground. They are pretty bright and relative to the snag itself, and maybe pulling your attention away. They're kind of beautiful in their own. So I wouldn't want to, turn them muddy or anything like that, but perhaps darkening a little bit would improve the image. Okay, thanks.
Desolate. Sosafly, Namibia.
Well, it definitely gives the impression of desolations. And here is an example where two of things are better than one. As I said, we should consider these things not to be rules, but to be things in our toolbox, which we can pull out when appropriate. And while having three brings a sense of completeness, having two will contribute to this sense of desolation. So I think that's very important here. The shadows are a very significant contributor to this. Having them long and extending again contributes to this feeling of desolation. Now, when I look at this closely, I get sort of this impressionistic feel, and it's kind of this weird thing where I cannot tell if there is detail present or not. And as a result, I think this image is most effective when viewed from a distance of perhaps maybe twice the diagonal or a little bit more. So, if you can display it in a situation where people are kind of forced to look at it from a little bit of a distance, I think that really helps this image. There are also some halos where there's the dark branches are directly against bright, or the shadow areas even. You might want to try to eliminate those, although again, if you're looking at from the image at it from a distance, they're not quite so important. Okay, thank you.
Sky High Adventure.
Well, this is one of the most interesting balloon compositions I have seen. We see this sort of swoop that starts at the lower right-hand corner and then curves up to the middle and then to the top balloon. And that kind of curve, is dramatic. We often talk about like the S curve in a composition where we see a road or a stream disappearing in the distance. This is kind of a little modification, perhaps, of that same concept. And certainly the size contributes to that, where the massive balloon in the lower right, the next one's a little bit smaller, and then finally the little one smaller. So it's kind of creating this vanishing point as it goes into the distance. And of course, the colors are gorgeous. All of them are firing their gas burners to generate hot air, and then the sky is lovely as well. So thank you.
Pictorial Advanced, 6 images. Winter Hydrangea.
Yeah, I think there's very interesting colors in this image, but even more interesting to me are the patterns in the leaves. Now, for me, this image can't seem to decide whether it is a tapestry of colors and patterns, or if it is supposed to have a center of interest. A center of interest could be imposed on the image by deciding what is background and what is foreground, and then darkening and blurring the the background. So for example, the immediate leaves closest to the flower cluster could remain sharp and bright, and the remaining ones become darker, almost the opposite of what we actually see in the picture today. The flower cluster in the middle is moderately interesting, so I really can't figure out a way to do the conversion to make it clear that this is a tapestry of patterns as opposed to an image with a central a center of interest. So you might want to focus on making sure that it's clear there is a center of image. Thank you.
Green Between the Vines, BR Bone Winery, Sonoma County.
Yeah, you got the dappled light on here, which can sometimes be very difficult to handle, but I think it's handled very well here. This is mostly a shot about the pattern of these rows of vines and the green between them. And what makes it particularly interesting and fun is that those straight lines that are the rows of the vine are transformed into these gentle curves by the rolling hills. Now and then on top of that, the oak trees and the picnic table become kind of punctuation marks on the page. Now the whole image does kind of beg you to wonder what is over the hill. Thank you.
Deliciously yellow.
Yeah, this is a wonderful still life. It's sharp and brilliant throughout, but I particularly enjoy what I think is a little bit unusual, and that is the way the light falls off as you go up and over the top of the bouquet. So the bottom row of flowers are the brightest, and the ones above that get progressively darker. And I think that's a very interesting effect and a little bit unusual. The reflection off the water in the bottom is like a sapphire surrounding these stems. Very intriguing to see that. Now, I do think that this image might benefit from a little more negative space around the flowers. On the side to side, maybe that's fine, but I think particularly above the flowers, I think it would need a little bit more space to breathe would be an improvement. Okay, thanks.
Tulip Wabi Sabi, perfectly imperfect.
Yeah, wabi-sabi is a Japanese aesthetic. It's sometimes described as one of appreciating beauty that is imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete in nature. And this image is a great example. The wrinkled, asymmetric petals of the flower have their own unique charm in a way that a perfect flower simply cannot have. The photographer has captured that by isolating the flower, by making it so much brighter than the background, and making sure there are no warm, not so much warm, but kind of these saturated pastel colors, and some warm colors are pretty much absent from the background and exist only in the flower itself. Thank you.
Into the Mist at Abbott's Lagoon.
Yeah, it's a bucolic scene, and it has a nice leading line that brings us up to a person who adds a point of interest and kind of becomes the surrogate for the viewer and makes us feel like we could be in this scene. There's this wooden structure there that's kind of a solid base to a fence or something. I don't know quite what it is. It's there. There's nothing you can do about it. But the fact that it stops at the person's feet gives it maybe more prominence than it otherwise would. And it does tend to be something that is kind of preventing the viewer from moving all the way into the frame. They kind of hit that stop and then have to jump over it. Maybe if you'd taken the picture just an instant before that where the person has not quite reached the point there, that may have helped this, because then they would be interrupting that structure rather than ending up being kind of an anchor for it. That's something to think about. I did notice as kind of this dark line that's at the edge of the ridge and where the hills meet the sky. I don't know if that was an attempt to eliminate the halo, but at least, for someone like me who pays a lot of attention closely to the images, it's a little bit distracting, and I would work on that maybe to eliminate it. Thank you.
Only the most experienced surfers take on the breakers on the rugged south coast of Hawaii's Big Island.
Yeah, this is a very big island photograph. Instead of sandy beaches, we have lava coming right up to the water boundary. I really love that, color of the water. The sapphire blue is just quite lovely. I think you chose a very good shutter speed here for conveying the power of the surf smashing against the rocks. Now, here's another thing in our toolbox about putting the main subject at the 1/3 corner. And in this case, I think using that tool is quite effective. It's working well in this image. If you could get a little bit of separation between the top of the surfer's head and the rocks behind, that might be a slight improvement, but overall it's working well. If you can bring out just a tad more detail in some of the brightest areas of the water, that would be nice as well. But again, you certainly would prefer to have this bright, glowing white rather than some murky gray in the surf. Thanks.
7 images. An old workers' graveyard near the Rio Grande.
It's very dramatic and poignant. The central cloud with this orange glow is kind of reminiscent of a Turner painting, and I think is appropriate for the scene. I'd also expect to see that kind of cloud and maybe a painting of a Christian resurrection scene or something like that. The cross on the left does a pretty good job of reflecting the same colors in the cloud. And in fact, it looks better when I'm looking at it tonight than it did when I was previewing the image. In fact, overall, for some reason, everything looks a little bit more consistent with color, because my initial impression was that the foreground wasn't as consistent with that sky as I would have liked it to be. I'm thinking maybe even a lower perspective would have helped, but given what you have, I also wonder if there isn't creative dodging and burning, and perhaps even some color grading that would add some drama to the foreground and kind of match it to the drama of the sky. I have to say, this is one of my concerns of judging projected images versus prints is, it can look on the different screens can look totally different. And, the maker may be seeing one thing on their screen that's so different than what I'm seeing on my screen that, they're saying, what the heck is that guy talking about? We don't have that problem, of course, with prints where everyone is looking at the exact same image. Okay, thanks.
Morning fog lifting, West Marin County.
Yeah, beautiful bucolic scene. I love the colors in this. I think the large tree particularly makes a nice anchor for the view of the hills, and the addition of the house and its associated farm buildings also really contributes to the overall feel of this image. The image has been processed to give it kind of a painterly feel, but it's done in a way that does not draw attention to the process, but just contributes to the emotional response that one gets from the scene. So I think that's, a really good job there. I wonder if a slight vignetting might contribute to this, particularly in the lower corners, which are a little bit bright. And now we get into the kind of those real picky details that I sometimes like to look at. And if you look in the lower left-hand corner, and again in the lower right-hand corner, you can see some little strips where the color and texture are quite radically different than the area just above it. And that looks a little bit odd. Most people probably wouldn't notice this, but I would go in and either to slightly crop up or clone out those areas to keep the pattern consistent there. Thanks.
An eagle at sunrise.
It's a dramatic use of color and silhouette. Certainly has a strong appearance with the dramatic contrast between the eagle and the sky and the sun. Again, using that kind of 1/3 tool out of our toolbox in the composition. Normally, I suggest having some kind of separation between subjects, but it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And in this case, I think having the tips of the feathers of the eagle touching the sun is actually contributes a lot and in a positive way to this image. Makes it quite strong. Okay, next.
Owens Valley Dawn.
This image really makes me feel chilly, but anticipating being warmed by the sun. I like the compression of distance that's making the distant images, the distant mountains feel so dramatic. I don't know how you took this picture, but one way sometimes this effect can be accomplished is by using a long lens and then taking several images and stitching them together into a panorama. So you get that compression of the long lens plus the wide field of a wide angle lens at the same time. I think the shadow in the foreground at the very bottom of this image kind of plays the same role as a vignette sometimes does in an image, kind of keeps your eye in the image. I think that's working very well. I think that the kind of golden tree is lovely and kind of mimics the shape of the mountain behind it. This is very different from many pictures of the Owens Valley. And I kind of feel like it makes me feel like the person who took this picture really understands the place and is in love with it. Thank you.
Cattle egret with twig.
Well, certainly a very dramatic capture here where we have the brilliant bird against this really dark background. But I am really glad for that lighter area at the bottom, out of focus, probably trees or something there. It really kind of makes the image feel a little bit more natural than it would if, say, the overall image had just this pure black background. And it kind of prevents the negative space from being oppressive. And of course, we have, the sharp eyes and the bird, brilliant lights highlighting the face and the twig, and the bird caught in flight. Thanks.
Sharing some thoughts on a trail.
Yeah, we have a good use of the leading line. There's some nice S curves within the main trail there that add some interest to the image. The people are well positioned in the frame. The title brings our attention to the people and makes us appreciate their pose a little bit better, perhaps, than some other title might. Both the monochrome and the fog contributes to the mood and also separates the people out from the background. And you've got a very good depth of field here where you've kept everything from the very center front of the image to the back, optically sharp, and just let the fog generate the blur in the image, which is quite wonderful. Thanks.
Sunset on Neskowin Beach.
Beautiful light and color in the sky, on the sand, and on the buildings. The two couples really stand out. At first, I thought they were the only people on the beach. It was only with very close inspection that I was able to identify other people, and that really adds to the feeling. Excuse me a minute. Now, I do feel that the perspective gives an inordinate weight to features in the sand in the foreground. I don't know whether these pot marks or footprints or what they are, but they're pretty dramatic in the foreground. I don't think they're particularly interesting or beautiful or adding to the mood of the image. So I would suggest you experiment with cropping up from the bottom and just eliminate that whole dark area of sand at the bottom of the image and seeing what you think of the result. I think I would have preferred that the two main subject people be a little bit sharper. Perhaps you were using a small shutter aperture and a long shutter speed, and so there's a little bit of motion blur there. But that's the way it is, I guess. Okay, thanks.
Okay, the final category for the evening is non-competitive, and we have 9 entries. All aboard.
I think this would be a very suitable entry in the creative division, but it would also be acceptable in pictorial. This is sort of like a time-lapse image superimposing a close-up of the drive mechanism of a steam engine taken at several times. We use light and darkness to separate the different times. So you have one main image, which is bright, and then each subsequent image gets a little bit darker. I think that is working quite well. I would, in that regard, I would say that perhaps the bar that's in the lower right-hand corner, that diagonal, maybe is a little bit light compared to where it fits in with the whole composition. So you might want to consider darkening that. I think the gold color is quite lovely. I think I'm used to seeing these as being silvery, and so the gold is kind of an interesting interpretation. There's kind of this moire pattern, particularly in the darker areas, and I do think that kind of adds a sense of mystery and the passage of time. The title does help put the image in context, but it's not being so literal that it allows our minds to open to interpretation. Okay, thanks.
Oops. Beat me up, Scotty.
Yeah, clearly intended for the creative division. It's a lovely multi-universe view. The spirals created by warping what is probably a bridge, I think, are particularly effective. I enjoy them a lot. I generally like having people in the image, but for me, the blue-shirted man in the largest ball and the yellow-shirted man in the upper right sphere don't really fit the mood, at least for me. The other people and the other reflection of the yellow shirted man, I think are okay, but those two, they just don't kind of fit in with it for at least for me. I do think the Star Trek reference in the title really does not do justice to this image. I think that there's a lot more in this image than that Star Trek reference would imply. Next.
The sunflower.
I think it's very interesting how you've captured the wilting sunflower and processed the image so that it gives the impression of weeping. Part of this, of course, is due to the relatively high contrast that you've chosen to use this. And I think the cool monochrome is also quite effective. And naturally, the title kind of sets our mind into a state where it's willing to accept this idea of the weeping sunflower. I'm sure that Nancy knows this, but just to remind people, in competition, you can't have anything in the image that identifies the maker. Certainly in the non-compete critique only section, it doesn't matter. Okay, next.
Unapologetically misusing iPhone apps with apologies to Roscoe.
So I think that if you get the image you want, then by definition, you can't be misusing the app. You know, what's kind of interesting is what jumped in my mind when I saw this image was Christina's World by Wyeth. Even though, you know, there's a radical difference between the style in this image and the style in that painting. I think the umber colored field nicely contrasts with the blue sky. I like the way there's kind of a natural vignette here where it's kind of bright in the center and gets dark towards the edge. Kind of this textured feel, it works quite well. I like the big wide black border as well. I think that's quite works quite well in this. I do wonder if the title is an attempt to spark a conversation about N4C competition rules, but this is not the time and place for that. Next, please.
Each detail.
Well, this image starts with a nice base that consists of contrasting colors. The orange and the blue are in a quite appealing arrangement. And these cracks add a lot of interest to the image as well. It would be interesting even if the stones were not present. It does feel maybe a little bit off balance because you have so much orange in the lower left-hand corner, and so kind of tilts that way. The presence of the stones actually counterbalances that quite well. Although I do think it would have been nice. There's not much you can do about it, but it would have been nice if the larger collection of stones were on the left-hand side and the smaller collection on the right. I do find the little stones in the cracks leading away from or leading to the smaller collection of stones is quite interesting in itself, and might make an interesting image all by itself. Thanks.
Fierce.
Well, the woman's expression certainly matches the title, and it's a nice counterpoint to the connotation that parasols typically have. And I do think the position of the parasol is done quite well. I enjoy very much the high key of the parasol, and I do like the way the woman sort of fades into the parasol. Now there are some, it looks like maybe hairs that are intruding into her eyes, and I think you should consider cloning them out. Excuse me. Particularly the one over her left, our right eye. I think I might actually find it interesting if the white parasol was the complete background without the dark blue above, but I don't see, excuse me. But I don't see any way you could crop the image to make that the case. Okay, thanks.
Sequence 2, Ukrainian rally. Nearly 100 people gathered at Courthouse Square, Santa Rosa, in solidarity with the people of Ukraine. This family's anguish is apparent as they listen to the speakers. They exemplify the pain and feeling of helplessness many are feeling.
In the first picture, you have done a good job of separating the family from the background with depth of field, while including enough of the background to give a feeling that they are part of a crowd that's out in support of the people of Ukraine. Certainly capturing a bit of the Ukrainian flag in the background helps tell the story. The expressions on the women's faces definitely show anguish. And the woman in the cap on the right appears to be staring right past the photographer as if the photographer weren't there. The man's expression is a bit ambiguous. He's looking right at the camera. Is he being protective or suspicious? Doesn't really contribute to the feeling of anguish. And this takes a little bit away from the message. The second picture is certainly nice. Hands always express emotions, but I'm not sure it adds enough to justify a sequence. Since this, on another point, since this is journalism, a date of the rally would be helpful, and ideally something personal about the people in the front, in the first photograph, would make this an outstanding contribution to photojournalism. Thank you.
Portrait of a great urn.
I like the textured background, particularly as it is lightest around the bird and gets darker towards the border. The bird is well exposed. The eye is nicely sharp, as are the feathers. The light nicely models the bird's shape, making it feel really three-dimensional. Now, there is a bit of a blue halo around the bird, which I find distracting, as well as some blue tinging of the feathers, particularly in the left shadow area. I think does not add to the image, and you might want to try to get rid of it. Now, because of processing, this is a photo that would work well in the pictorial division, but would not be acceptable in nature. Next, please.
Forest fantasy.
This is an intriguing semi-abstract that I think would work quite well in the creative division. The vertical bars do give the feeling of a forest, perhaps with fog rendering further trees in the background even more abstract. Although in silhouette, the birds are otherwise quite realistic, in contrast to the abstract nature of the rest of the photo, and they bring some focus to the image. The cyan in the lower left makes me think of sunbeams. I like how you've treated the border as well. Okay.
Okay. We've reached the end of all the images. We've covered all images tonight. We'll take a 5-minute break. Steve, are you going to announce the awards?
I'm all set.
Okay.
Okay, let me switch to the ICM. Okay, Creative Basic 2 images. Second place, Elizabeth.
Oh, I love this.
Lovely.
Yeah.
I don't
So-
think she's here tonight, is she?
No.
No.
Was.
Oh,
Congratulations to Elizabeth, first place.
Well done.
Mark,
Oh, maybe
Oh,
not.
wow.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it tonight. As everyone's been saying, I learned a lot. Quarry Hill, which is now Sonoma Botanical Garden. So, yeah, thank you.
The colors in this.
Yeah, cool colors.
Thanks a lot.
congratulations.
Congratulations.
Creative Intermediate, 3 images, third place. Pat,
Oh,
Oh,
thank
wow.
you. Yeah, actually, these are sleeping chicks. They were in my lap and they were sound asleep. And we took some pictures of them. I took some pictures and I just kind of cut them out of an image and put them on an egg because Easter's coming. And we have a lot of grandkids coming up for Easter egg hunts, so I was feeling the mood. But thank you for your comments, really. Maybe I shouldn't have had such an orange egg, might make them look like they're on fire. So I appreciate that.
Quite the brood.
Nice photo, very creative.
congratulations. Second place. Ellen,
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your comments. This was shot looking up through a mesh down at the Salesforce Park. And that's what that mesh overlay is. And that's what somehow made the camera bring out those whites streaks. It was just, just an interesting shot. And it's mainly just what happened.
Cool. Congratulations. I love it.
congratulations. First place. Laura,
Thank you. I was out at a client's ranch and she had all these cute little bright watering cans lined up, and I thought, oh, that'll make a great picture, just even the way it was. And then I got some input and talking to some people to kind of how to take it up a notch to use it in creative. So thank you.
Well done.
congratulations. Creative Advanced, 4 images, honorable mention. Ronnie,
Nice.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been, this was kind of at the beginning of this horror that Ukraine has been going through, and I just wanted to do something. And so this kind of expressed what I was feeling. So thank you for recognizing it. And your points are well taken.
Beautifully done, Ronnie.
Thank you.
Lovely.
congratulations. Third place. Linda,
Oh, wow. Very cool.
Linda here?
No, she's on a road trip, I think.
Uh-huh.
congratulations to Linda. Second place.
I like the feel of that.
Jennifer,
Woo.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, this was a 14 millimeter wide angle lens. And I see what you mean about those wires. I still don't know whether I would have, there's just so much detail in there that it really scared me to try to get rid of them. But anyway, thank you very much.
congratulations.
Jennifer. Image.
Love that.
Congratulations.
Great image.
And the perspective is excellent.
First place. Steve,
Oh,
Oh, thank you. There's a lot I could say about this image because this has been
Louder, Steve.
there's a lot I can say about this image. This was a real project. The fisherman was, all of this was taking, with the exception of the 2 fish, was taking at bodega This is at Bodega Head off the point there. And the godlight was happening in many places. But this area of the godlight was off to the left more. So the godlight that was in this frame was a bit off the left, and this wasn't in that location. So I ended up basically swapping a sky out. But to do that, I basically had to compress it down. So I removed some of the ocean, and this was a hell of a challenge for me. This was one of the most difficult things I've had to do. So I really wanted the godlight in there, but then I changed the perspective of the image. It made it a little bit wider. But I had to play with this forever to get that right. And I had several renditions of this, starting with just the biggest fish on the rock there, which is a striped bass that I actually caught in another location and took a cell phone picture of it and then added it here. And then the same with the other fish that's out in the water. But the fisherman was at Bodega Head as you're driving up on the left-hand side where the boats go out, and he was actually facing a little differently and was casting out. So the rod he had just released and his head and shoulders were up. So I had to go in and puppet work him and get the rod to bend. And then I had to add, I didn't even see it in there, but add fishing line in on there. I changed the waves where this fish is in the water. I actually changed the wave in there because one thing that happens when I'm used to doing a lot of salmon fishing, and when you get a big fish on, when it comes in, that fish is pretty much just gives up. They're just bleh, and it just looked like flat on the water. So I actually warped the water a little bit and kind of made it so that it was like there's a little more interest to that, a little more like almost like he was fighting, but he wasn't. So anyway, there was so many challenges to this. Color and shadows were different on things, and just, oh my God, it was brutal. So I appreciate, I feel like I earned it on this one because it was brutal. And I showed it to, a few people and got some ideas. I had several renditions with different birds, and I had a smaller one that looked like it would have been straight over his head. It was much smaller. And I was like, oh, can't see the bird very well. And it's like, well, okay. So I really struggled with this. And still at the end, I was thinking the judge is going to say that bird doesn't look realistic because he's too big over his head, and he should be facing out towards the ocean like he was flying towards him or something. So I really didn't know how I was going to do that. So anyway, thank you.
Wow.
Congratulations, Steve. It was
You
worth
do a
it.
lot of work. Good job.
Worth the effort.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
thank you.
Creative Masters, 4 images, honorable mention. Tony.
Cool.
Thank you. I called Jerry to find out how I did this. It was one of those things that sort of came out okay, but it wasn't how it started out, and it magically appeared. So thank you very much.
Well done, Tony. This is kind of different for what I'm used to seeing you do. I really like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was different for me too, Steve.
Yeah.
Wonderful
Yeah.
color.
Yeah.
Creative is fun.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I
Right,
want
Jerry.
more.
Peter Max is coming back.
Congratulations. 3rd place. Mike.
Wow.
Mike is traveling.
He's out of country.
Cool image, though. I like it.
Would have liked to have learned the details of how this was made.
Yeah, it's a nice image.
Very creative.
Yep. I've
Congratulations to Mike.
I
always
wonder
wanted
if he
to-
ate it after.
Oh.
2nd place. Me.
Oh, wonderful.
All right.
And if you look at the faces at the right and you follow them as they sort of curve down, that each face is actually a face upside down and right side up. And if you follow the line of the nose, it's like the eye is from the upside down face on the right, but the eye on the left is from the lower face. And they sort of rotate over. But the reason over on the left side, the faces are different angles is because in doing these mirror reflections, usually you think of mirror reflections as having an x-axis and a y-axis, but this software also has a z-axis for distance. So what you're actually looking at is reflections in 3 dimensions.
Mind-boggling.
Very cool.
Very interesting.
Thank you.
I like it in black and white.
It's real different.
Yeah.
That's also thresholding an image and then doing what's known as an edge sketch. You see all the little straight lines? Straight lines at the center point will define curves. And so that gives it a pencil type effect.
I can see fabric for one of Nancy's shirts.
Yeah.
I like the title.
Yeah. Congratulations, Steve. Nice.
Thank you. First place, Anne.
Oh,
Oh, thank you. This was encouraged by Terry, who took some of us out to Pierce Ranch. And so I was experimenting. I was in a barn and the light that was in the barn was just coming through the cracks. So when I put my shutter speed on super slow shutter, then it gave this effect. You have to take a lot of them to try to find something that works. But I thought this one kind of worked.
wow. It does look
Definitely
like
does.
paper.
It does.
Were
I
you-
love the movement in it.
Were you moving like a whole bunch of times in the same image, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10?
I was just moving the camera.
Yeah, that's what I mean. If you're moving the camera a number of times, like left to right, and kind of curved.
Well, the shutter was only, like maybe a 15th
of a
or
second.
an 1/8 of a second, one of the two probably. And so you just sort of have to move.
So it's not a
the
composite.
camera. And sometimes I move myself instead of the camera.
Yeah.
How do you
Okay.
get
Not
the
a
sharp,
composite, though?
how do you get the sharp images, the sharp edges, at the end of the object, whatever that is?
Well, I kind of wondered that myself. So I'm not
think
really sure.
Do you think it's contrast that does it?
I don't know. I've never gotten this effect before when I've done this.
So is it multiple exposure?
Yeah, I do have a big barn, so maybe I should get out there and experiment a little bit more.
It's wonderful, Anne.
Yeah.
Nice.
Anne.
That's a cool
Thank
image.
you very much.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Nice, yeah.
Journalism Basic, 2 images, second place, Amy. Is Amy here tonight?
No,
You know,
Congratulations to Amy. First place. Elizabeth, also not here.
I love this.
Journalism Intermediate, 2 images, second place, Pat.
ooh,
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I appreciate your comment about the, this one picture being enough. I wanted to experiment with putting in 2 images, but maybe I shouldn't have. Anyway, this is a trip we took to Mongolia to an eagle festival. And it was pretty amazing. It was a very small one. It wasn't a big one like in Ulaanbaatar. It was in the rural area.
Congratulations.
Very exciting.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
First place. Laura.
Thank you. Actually, I was going out to Bodega and I saw these people way out in the middle. I thought, oh, that might make a good picture for something. So then I went out and took some photos, and then on my way back, I'm like, wait a minute, that looks like Mike and Tony pulled over. And so I pulled over, and then I realized that they were rescuing these stupid people that got themselves out in the middle of the bay. So I didn't, like I said, the first picture was taken completely separate of what ended up happening after the fact. And I just had to get her in there with those red shoes somehow.
Good job.
Nice, Laura. Nice
Need a
job.
red chair in there somewhere too. Cool.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Journalism Advanced, 3 images, 3rd place. Gary.
Yeah, we were just on the way home from over the coast and decided to drive over towards I-5, and then we went across on the highway we were on. I always kind of wanted to get some pictures because I knew there was a story here, but then I didn't realize how many oil, pumps and things were going on. I don't know if those are towers to help for fracking or what, but there was a lot of stories there. And so I just tried the best I could to bring out some kind of a story about the basics without getting into any the conversation about gas prices and things, or how much money Chevron's making, or whatever, So that's what it was. Yeah.
Wow.
Congratulations.
Good story.
Thank you.
2nd place. Bob.
Well, flower piano is one of the favorite events I like to take in at the Botanic Gardens. It's just lovely to be able to walk through there. The pianos are spaced sufficiently so you don't hear anything else except the particular performer where you are. But then as you're walking along, the sounds will filter towards you. And, there's just a lot of different atmosphere there and different kinds of activities. And it's just a wonderful setting to capture people. And that's what I was doing for this one. I'm not sure when this was. I think it was during the pandemic, because you can see there's a woman in the back there wearing a mask, but clearly it wasn't during a time when we had to all wear them. It may have been this, it's in September, it may have been this last September.
Love it.
Nice intimate image there.
Yeah, I like that one.
Really captured a sense of what was happening, how people reacted to it.
Congratulations.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
1st place. Jennifer.
Oh, thank you.
wow.
This was a really interesting experience to see how bears and people get to coexist. And it's getting harder and harder for the bears because the sea ice is forming later and later. And so they get real hungry and they're just so attracted to come into town. Anyway, it was a really interesting to see how careful they were with the bears and how, it was just, and how they learned how to treat the bears in order to not encourage them to come back into the area. And thank you very much. I appreciate your comments.
Yeah, it was an interesting fact on that last slide you had.
A great title, one of the best.
I just can't imagine how they get the bears from there. They're huge, how they transport them to another location. They're big animals.
Especially
Yes,
hungry
very
bears.
big.
Really
Yeah,
interesting
our
story.
guide told us that, he warned his people not to go into those cages because, if there was an accident, it's very difficult. Those doors are just so heavy that people can't on their own push them up. And this
Sorry.
guy went in, touched the rag, got himself locked in, and he ended up spending almost 24 hours in there.
Oh, wow.
We could get the equipment to get him out of there.
Wow.
Man,
Wow.
good story.
Great story.
Mm-hmm.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Journalism Masters, 3 images, 3rd place. Bill.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this is a backpacking trip, and I was really surprised to see surfers a couple of days into the trip, and ended up taking these pictures. And I actually submitted these last 2 images a few months ago. Lisa Riga was our, she said, well, those 2 images were okay, but you need to tell more of the story. So I didn't really have great images for the other part of the story. I did my best here. And I certainly agree with Doug's comments in the first 2 images. Thank you.
Congratulations. 2nd place. Herb.
Well, thank you. I'm usually a landscape guy, and my son lives in Bishop, so I'm out before the sunrise every morning, driving along the Owens River in my truck. And this is something I came across there and had heard about in the local newspaper. So it's a tragedy, and I wasn't going to enter it. I took them, but I decided let me put them in anyway. So thank you.
Powerful.
Congratulations.
That last image is moving.
Yes, yeah, it really is.
1st place. Tony.
This is sort of an interesting story. I was scouting the railroad for a field trip. And I was done with that, and I started taking a look at the turbines, and I was driving along, and all of a sudden I said, oh my God, what's going on that propeller? And I got my tripod out, I got my 100-400 out, I started shooting away, and when I was almost done, I realized that there was a 2nd guy on the propeller. And lo and behold, I look through the camera, and the bottom guy was waving at me. And I went, oh my God, this is going to win something. And I went, I don't think it's pictorial. Maybe it's journalism. So I came home. I didn't have to do much work on this at all. And then thank God for Lightroom, because I typed in wind and I got all of these other images to support it. So thank you.
You wind.
Made the story around the
Oh,
picture.
Great shot, Tony.
Timing is everything.
Great shot.
Congratulations, that's awesome.
It's totally.
Very cool.
Congratulations. Pictorial Basic, 4 images, honorable mention. Elizabeth. 3rd place. Amy.
Nice image, Amy.
2nd place. Mark.
All right.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Great image, Mark.
Thank you. Yeah, just
Well
Mac.
done.
Thank you.
I love his bugs.
Yeah,
Right.
and the colors are stunning. So cool.
Yeah, I like my bugs.
Bug man.
Yep.
Congratulations. 1st place. Lucy.
Oh,
Wow, Lucy.
love that.
That is a beauty.
Great lighting.
Gorgeous.
I want to know how she got that angle.
Maybe she got wet.
I actually have a friend that has gotten into photography and she goes to the water with her waders on.
Wow.
Beautiful image. Wonderful feel.
It's wonderful.
Congratulations to Lucy.
Yeah.
Pictorial Intermediate, 4 images, honorable mention, Fritz.
Well, this is another one of my snag series pictures. There'll be more.
Great image. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's up in the high country, looking at Mount Whitney right there. So high up, hard to get to.
Definite
Guys are
spirit.
amazing.
Congratulations. Second place, Pat.
Oh, thank you.
I mean,
Yeah,
third place.
Third place. It was desolate and it's pretty amazing place to go to if you ever get a chance. So thank you very much. And thanks for your comments too.
Very nice. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Second place, Ellen.
Well, thank you. You know, I just managed to get this and it just looked so dated, yet it was last month or so. And if I did make his face clearer, you'd see that he's wearing a mask. So yeah, and the woman on the right was also wearing a white mask, and I turned it black. So it doesn't, but other than that, everything seems so period. And thank you for pointing out the frame. I've never, I don't think I've used any frames, and I have to admit that it is stock. I didn't even think about it. So
it could be a 1918 photograph.
Exactly.
Except
The
for
great
masks.
flu epidemic.
Oh, there? Oh, yes. Did they wear masks then?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
they did. They were all white though.
Yeah.
And they were fined if they didn't wear them.
You wouldn't find masks with the Giants logo on it.
Congratulations. First place. First place, Laura.
Oh.
Oh, that's a
Being
great
sweet,
one.
girl.
Thank
Oh,
you.
nice.
Yeah, I went with a group over there one morning and I hadn't shot the hot air balloons before, and yeah, it was a pretty cool experience, and I just liked the way those all lined up. So thank you.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Pictorial Advanced, 4 images, honorable mention, Bill.
Great shot. That water's amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations to Bill. Third place, Linda.
Love that.
Winery.
Don't think she's here.
Congratulations to Linda. Second place, Ronnie.
Oh, thank you. I have been encouraged by all the wabi-sabi images that I've seen from Harold Davis, and I took this at Ferrari Carano winery up in Geyserville. It is actually a tulip. That's right. It says that in the title, but you wouldn't know that unless I put it in the title. Yeah. So thank you. I fell asleep, so I didn't hear your comment, but
It was recorded.
but thank you.
Nice image.
Congratulations. First place. Linda again.
This Linda's night.
Yeah.
It is beautiful.
Congratulations to Linda. Pictorial Masters, 5 images, honorable mention. Anne.
Oh, I love this.
Thank you. This was on the way out to Point Reyes, and it was kind of foggy and the fog was lifting, and I kind of liked the lighting that was going on there. So anyway, thank you.
Love the color.
Was it a drive-by or did you stop?
We stopped, I think.
It's
Isn't that D Street?
Is that where we stopped, Liz?
Yep.
Yeah, it looks like the one is you're going out D Street.
Yeah.
Did you give it any treatment in post? Because the kind of moody look that it has, it looked really nice. It's almost like a painting.
I did. I used just a tiny bit of a filter to get rid of some speckly look to it. So it kind of smoothed it out a little bit and gave it that more pastoral look.
Nice. Worked out beautiful.
Very nice.
Soft and lovely.
Velvety.
Just want to walk up the hill and go to the green verdant area.
Congratulations. Honorable mention. Liz.
Thanks. This was at Pierce Point Ranch, the road was, and the people were in a barn door, but I put them there because I needed something to end the lane.
You did a nice job working them in.
Yeah,
Thank you.
nice.
So it's natural.
You might know who they are, but I won't say.
Wouldn't know if you hadn't told us.
Congratulations. Third place. Bill.
Oh, that's great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This was taken at the 9th Street Rookery. The many hundreds pictures that I took there a couple of weeks ago.
Nice head-on shot.
Beautiful.
Really nice.
They're not easy
you.
to get.
Yeah, probably. Great catch.
Congratulations. Second place. Herb.
Wow.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. As I said before, my son lives out in Bishop, so every morning I'm out before sunrise trying to get images like this. This is a location I had scouted out the day before and knew where I wanted to go, and got there in time. It's probably like 20 degrees. So set the tripod up, intervalometer on, and sat back and let it go while I warm myself up a little bit. So I'm glad it's appreciated. It's a spectacular place.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Gorgeous.
I want to go back.
Congratulations. First place. Mike.
Yeah.
Wow.
He's gone.
Yeah.
Lovely.
That's
No
fantastic.
wasted time.
Congratulations to Mike. And the grand winner of the evening, Lucy.
Congrats.
That's very cool.
Very nice.
Very, very nice.
Well, thank you for all your constructive criticism, whatever critique. All your stuff was very helpful.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Doug.
My
Good night,
pleasure.
everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Doug.
Yeah.
Steve.
Thanks for no more hitches in the second half.
Yeah.
Thanks,
And
Doug.
Doug, I was in the non-comp and I really appreciate all your comments.
Excellent commentary, Doug.
Very good.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Thanks, Doug.
Welcome. Well done.
Appreciate
Very
it.
thoughtful.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, all.
Hey, Nancy, good meeting.